What a blessing it is to be able to gather, even in this time, to gather together in this community. It is our practice to light a chalice when we're together in the sanctuary, and I will do that now. I invite you as well to light a candle or a chalice if you have one at home, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. This morning, I would like to use a very unique chalice lighting that was long the custom of the congregation in the Buffalo Church to say each Sunday morning. And it is a combination of two readings that are in our hymnal, combination of a Passover, Haggadah, and words by Charles Gordon Ames. Very familiar words to me. We light our chalice to remind us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve the spirit of freedom. In the freedom of truth and the spirit of love, we unite for the worship of the holy and the service of humanity. Our time for all ages this morning is called The Treehouse Rules, and it's a story from another congregation that tried to build a space for their young people, and we're very excited about it. The treehouse was built on the congregation's grounds using labor and materials that the congregants brought over 3 Saturdays, and they were so excited for the young people to have this wonderful space to play in and be together. And so they finished up over these 3 Saturdays in September with this donated lumber, donated labor, and the kids even got involved. They got it all done. There was a wonderful window that faced over the playground. There was a rope ladder that the kids could climb up, and there was a slide that you could slide down and exit the tree house. Everyone was so excited about all the planning and all the construction, but soon a problem arose. Too many kids wanted to enjoy the treehouse at once, and their different ideas about how to use it, their different ages, different needs, came into conflict with each other. The younger kids wanted to run races right through the treehouse and climb up the rope ladder and then just run through and race down the slide over and over and over again. But the older kids, they wanted to hang out in the treehouse during and after the worship service and play games and talk, sit on the couches, whatever. So one day, a second grader who was racing through interrupted the fifth grader's game of cards for the third time, and that was it. Somebody just snapped, and there was a fight that broke out. There was name calling, there was pushing, and then there were tears. Now, some adults, after that, demanded that the treehouse be off limits until the children would learn to cooperate with each other. The adults said that their children had, other adults, the parents, said that their children had special rights to use the treehouse because they had helped to build it. And the Religious Education Committee started to have meetings about creating a policy for use of the treehouse. Does this sound familiar? They were getting ready to report to the congregation's board of directors with their findings. Now, meanwhile, the minister considered maybe they should bring in a consultant from the regional staff of the UUA to address this conflict, which had now spread through the entire congregation. But an interesting thing happened while the adults were arguing and holding meetings and creating policies, and this is what happened. The kids who had been temporarily banned from the treehouse, they started talking to each other and looking for ways that they could all use the playhouse together. A few of them remembered the covenants that they had created during their RE programs the year before. And so they suggested that a covenant be created for how the kids would use the treehouse. So they sat down and they talked about the reasons that they liked the treehouse and what made it fun for them and what they might need to enjoy the treehouse. They discovered the ways that they could all enjoy it in the way that they wanted to at different times and in different ways. They came up with a covenant which laid out how they would be in the treehouse and how they would respect others who were also free to use the space. So just as the adults were starting a big congregational meeting to adopt a policy for the use of the treehouse, some church leaders looked out the window and they saw the children cooperating with each other and using the treehouse without conflict. A teenager was dispatched to the treehouse to check out what was going on, and they discovered the rules, the covenant that the participants had come up with. And she brought back these rules to the larger congregation, and the announcement came that the participants had created a covenant with each other. So the adults were humbled by this new development. Some of them sheepishly glanced up at their church covenant that was up on the wall, framed. It was hanging there, but it was mostly forgotten. The congregational meeting adjourned. The adults went on their way, reminded of the power of covenants, that working together to find a solution and the commitment of people in right relationship with each other can solve problems like this. And it was all because of the Treehouse Rules. So we'll think about that going forward. Shortly after my family and I moved to Buffalo in 2008, I joined the Unitarian Universalist congregation there. It was a time of discovering all kinds of new things in the community, new people, making new friends, trying new groups to see if I fit in with them. And so I was meeting a lot of people. People who, like me, were spiritual seekers, people like me who enjoyed the performing arts, people like me who liked animals, people like me who liked to try new restaurants. But I found that though I was meeting many, many people and making lots of friends, more and more, as time went on, the people that I chose to spend my time with were the people at the congregation. The relationships that I formed with those folks were sustained and sustaining relationships. It wasn't because we were spiritual seekers, because I met lots of other people outside the congregation that the same could be said of. It wasn't because we had the same political beliefs necessarily. It certainly wasn't because we all believed the same things about the creation of the universe or what happens when we die. Certainly not. Now, these people were not always my favorite people, actually. Sometimes they weren't kind. Sometimes their behavior disappointed me or made me mad. And I can even imagine that maybe my behavior disappointed or made them mad sometimes too. But nonetheless, I began to feel that there was this invisible thread connecting me to these people in the Buffalo congregation. And what I've come to understand about what that sustaining connection was is that we were held in a covenantal relationship. So over time, that feeling of covenant became more than just a fancy phrase for me, a fancy phrase that we trot out sometimes on Sunday mornings. I came to see that in a faith where there isn't a shared doctrine or a creed that we all adhere to, what unites us, the glue that holds us together, is these covenantal relationships. Now, what does this even mean? What does it mean to be in a covenantal relationship? Well, I want to emphasize a couple of things right here at the beginning. The word covenant has come down to us from, for example, the Hebrew Bible. And so there are many stories in that text of God making a covenant with a human or a group of humans. So many of us may have a lot of associations with this word covenant if we were raised in certain traditions. And some of them might be quite negative with this word. Just like lots of other words that we use and sometimes unpack here, like faith, holy, sacred, worship, God, for example. So I think we need a little bit to unpack this idea of a covenant. You see, our types of covenants are a little different. We generally look back to the congregation in Dedham, Massachusetts in 1637, and the desire of the people there to form a lay-led congregation of equals that was characterized by mutual care. So that mutual care and concern was what formed the community. You see, without necessarily an all-powerful deity to call upon, what we have is each other. And so Horizontal covenants are different than those vertical covenants that were made back in the Hebrew Bible between a deity and their followers. Horizontal covenants are more about a pair of people or a group of equals that decide to come together for some reason. Congregations have also, from this time period and forward, made made covenants with one another. And so a large group like a congregation can be a congregation among equals in an organization like the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is an association of congregations. So individuals can also form covenants. Often ministers will form covenants when they are working together, and sometimes other folks too. Staffs can have covenants, boards of trustees can have covenants. There can be lots and lots of covenants within one organization. I call our 1898 Bond of Union a kind of covenant. In its beautiful words, there are lots of whys and wherefores, why we are going to join together, what the purpose is for how we are going to be together, and what aims we are hoping to achieve, our aspirations, how we are going to live together and be together. But those early covenants don't always spell out the nuts and bolts of the how, right? They say things like live together in love, or dwell together in the Spirit, walk together in the ways of peace. But how does that really happen? What happens when the rubber hits the road? How do we dwell together in love and peace and care when we know that we are imperfect human beings and inevitably we are going to make a mistake or not be very loving one day, or not be at our best and say something that may hurt another person? We all have the best of intentions about forming and living into a covenant. But what happens when we fail, as we inevitably will? Let me shift a little bit and tell you that since I've moved to Erie, I've been watching my son learn to ice skate. Yes, I've been watching him learn to ice skate along with lots of other children who are complete beginners. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting. They fall down, they crash into the walls, they fall on their helmets mostly, which is good. And then somebody usually says, it's okay, you can do this. You can do this. Why don't you get back up and try again? Some of the kids over the few weeks that we've been going have gotten frustrated and they're not showing up anymore. They've never come back. But the ones that stay, they learn over time, their bodies learn over time to feel natural on the ice, to be graceful in this new medium. They've learned a new skill. Now, over the years, I have seen many congregational conflicts. And try as we might, we're not able to always live into the beautiful words of our missions, our bonds of union, our covenants. We're not always those people, those lofty people who live together in love and dwell in peace and walk in the ways of the Spirit. And sometimes when there is a conflict, feelings get hurt, tempers flare, and we don't always have a clear path for how we're going to resolve those conflicts. And sometimes what happens is people decide to leave. Now, this is always very unfortunate and sad, and it's always a loss for the congregation. But there is another way. There is another way to resolve conflicts. There's potential for growth and transformation if, like the ice rink, we can look at our congregation as a learning ground, a learning place where we can stumble, we can fall, and where folks will see us at our best, but will also catch us and pull us up and encourage us to try again. And maybe they'll give us some new tools for doing it better next time. Shouldn't our UU faith be a place where we learn to practice being good humans? Shouldn't it be a place where we can grow and transform and live closer and closer to our best selves? If we truly believe that love and human connection is at the heart of our faith, then shouldn't we be willing to try again when things break down? And so if you look at covenants that were created way back in the past, like the Dedham platform in Massachusetts, and covenants that are closer to our own time, you will see an interesting change. You'll notice that the purely aspirational language about living in love and peace and the ways of the Spirit have also included, those things have not gone away, but often you will now see in covenants an acknowledgement that sometimes we're going to fail in those attempts, and that conflict can be an opportunity. And some covenants even describe how that conflict, the process by which that conflict can be resolved, and how we can get back into right relationship with our communities, with those who are individuals in our communities that we may have harmed. So when language about conflict is included in a covenant, and language about a clear path to restoring right relationship, it gives us a little more hope. It sort of normalizes that we're going to mess up. And it also gives us a little more hope that we, imperfect individuals that we know we are, can live into these loving relationships and this community care that really is at the heart of Unitarian Universalism. And so I want to share a little story with you about a time that I was called into right relationship. It's a covenant that I have with my professional organization, the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. And we have a long covenant that goes over all kinds of ways that we make a promise to do our very best to do all of these things. And one of the things is that our words will not harm other people. And that when we do find that our words have harmed other people, that we will make amends for that. And that is a hard one, right? That's a very hard one to live into, but it helps to have it in writing. So I was at a collegial meeting one day, and I spoke. And when I spoke, I used a phrase, I'm not going to repeat it here, but I used a phrase that, unbeknownst to me as a privileged middle-class white person that did not have experience of the history of this term, it was deeply offensive on a historical basis to a group of people. Now later, another minister, she did not do this in public in front of a whole bunch of other people. She did not shame me in front of people, but she called me aside and she shared with me the origin of this term. And let me know in a very non-judgmental way that it was, that there were people who were very offended by the term, and that it was probably best not to use the term. Now, at that moment, I was filled with shame. I was filled with shame and embarrassment. I wanted to crawl under a rock. I was feeling like everyone was staring at me. I was feeling that everyone in the room was angry or even hated me. Those were the spiraling emotions that I went through. But I gave myself a little bit of time to calm down, and then I remembered some words of Maya Angelou, which are near and dear to my heart. She said, "When we know better, we do better." That phrase can contain multitudes of self-compassion and also the resolve to do our best. So I was able to take a pause, calm myself down, and then decide what to do. And what I decided to do was to share with the group my learning about this phrase, because it was not a commonly known story, and I've imagined that there were lots of people in the room who did not know what the origin of the phrase was. So I was able to thank the minister who shared the gentle correction with me and share with the group what I had learned. And there were lots of people who also did not know the origins of the term and were grateful. This is the way that covenant can be helpful to us. It can be helpful when we stumble and fall if we allow ourselves to have the humility to take the feedback that we're getting and to incorporate it into our behavior going forward, and also to make amends for whatever the behavior was. We have to forgive ourselves for stumbling and falling, but it's important to also get back up and resolve to do better. Now, it was not easy for me to go through this process, but I came out on the other side feeling stronger and believing that right relationship can be restored, that covenants are helpful and important, and that our words matter. Now, there are other ways that we can cause harm to one another. When our words are not just ignorant like mine were, but when they are unintentionally cruel or critical, we might need to go back and repair the damage that we've done, even if it wasn't our intention to harm. When we lose our temper, perhaps, in a moment of conflict with one another, a moment of stress or disagreement, or when we act at an inappropriate time in front of others, it's the work of us and the congregation to gently and non-judgmentally call ourselves back into right relationship with our community. Covenants are not contracts. When we make promises in a contract, we can be taken to court if we don't abide by what we say we'll do. But we are a congregation. We're not a corporation. We're not a court. We are called to remember our first principle, always, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, even when individuals are engaging in problematic behavior. And so we need to respond with firmness, but also with care and respect, which is a very, very hard thing to do. We need to remember the words of philosopher Martin Buber, who said, "We are a promise-making, promise-keeping, promise-breaking, and promise-renewing species." We need to remember that all of these phases are part of the covenantal process, And during the promise breaking and the promise renewing, those stages are not a failure of covenant. They are part of the work of covenant. And it's important to remember the idea that our covenantal relationships are big enough and strong enough to withstand these breaking of promises and to support the renewing of new promises. Covenants are best when they're created by an entire group of people. Everyone who is part of the congregation has a chance to say what they need. Like in the story of the Treehouse Rules, all of the kids who used the treehouse had a chance to say what they would need in order to feel safe and in order to enjoy the treehouse. So a successful covenant should be made by the group, not imposed from a minister or a board of directors. It's easier to do that, of course, in a small group, like the group of children or a small covenant group, but it's not impossible to do at a congregational level. Covenants should include a description of what will happen when the covenant is not observed and how to restore right relationship equilibrium when the covenant is breached. A covenant should never be used as a tool to enforce cultural norms by one group against another marginalized group, as has unfortunately happened in some of our congregations. At the same time, a covenant should never, a covenant that speaks of loving kindness should never be held up as an excuse for not confronting the behavior of a congregational bully, as has also happened in our congregations. In the end, a covenant is really a tool. How we use it, beyond the language that's prescribed in the covenant itself, that's really up to us. And often it takes a lot of practice to make sure even that everyone knows that we have a covenant. And so I would like to read you the words of our covenant here at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Erie. We covenant to promote a culture of compassion and acceptance in our relations with each other. We promise to listen with intent to understand and to communicate in an honest and respectful manner, even when we disagree. And we acknowledge that conflict is an opportunity for growth. And so, this morning, we're familiarizing with our own congregational covenant and with the ways that covenant gets used throughout our movement. And so I ask us to reflect on our own interactions of late, here in this sacred space, whether it's our sacred virtual space or our sacred building and sanctuary. Have we observed a culture of compassion and acceptance? Do we listen with the intent to understand? Do we communicate in an honest and respectful manner, even with those with whom we disagree? Do we view conflict as an opportunity for growth? Do we? If not, let's ask ourselves how we can renew our sense of living into this congregational covenant. Maybe there is someone that we need to speak with if we're holding a resentment about a past encounter. How can we do that honestly and respectfully, but firmly, holding our own boundaries? Maybe we ourselves have lost our temper with someone recently. Maybe our words have been unintentionally hurtful. Could we view this situation as an opportunity for growth and transformation? Could we make that effort to apologize, to make amends, to get back into right relationship with someone who's been harmed by our words? Can we view such a process as a sacred duty, a responsibility of membership in this community of love and care? Well, as we go forward into the unknown future, as a covenanted community, together, walking in the ways of the Spirit, may we continue to strengthen both our covenant and the practices, the community practices that it supports, and continue to find peace, harmony, and care together. I'm going to leave you with these words from Janice Marie Johnson about covenants. Covenants are intentional. Covenants are audacious. Covenants are a promise that can change our lives together in this faith. Together we will be stronger. Together we will be wiser. Together we will be gentler. We promise to recognize uniqueness, to treasure our faith, to honor our neighbors with holiness. We covenant to be committed to each other, to consider each one as significant, each one as valuable. We covenant to be invitational, to be accepting, to speak our grace-filled truth and forgive each other over and over again. And yes, to love. Our covenant stands firm. It is our embodiment of faith in each other. It is our blessing to each other. It is our commitment to each other. May we hold this community as a precious gift. May we hold our relationships as gifts that transcend borders. May we carry forth the intention of our covenant, the audacity of our covenant, the promise of our covenant, now and in years to come. May it be so. Our closing words for this covenantal service are from Reverend Leslie Takahashi, who writes, "All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a greater generosity of spirit, a deeper joy in this life we share." And I invite you to extinguish your chalice or candle if you have lit one at home with these words from Elizabeth Saylor Jones. "We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we will carry in our hearts until we are together again."